So just in case you're not sure, I'm Doryun Chong, and this is Danh Vo. So what we're going to do is that we're going to run a slideshow of exhibition views of the current exhibition, Noguchi for Danh Vo, Counterpoint at the M+ Pavilion. The exhibition has been up since November, so we're keeping it for a long run for another 3 weeks or so until the Easter weekend. And then at the end of the exhibition view, you will see some images of Jan's past exhibitions, just a few of very important projects that he has done over the last 10 years or so. So just to start off on a little bit of personal note, as an individual curator, I guess really the first moment of encounter and realization about Jan's work, I guess, was in 2009, this remarkable solo exhibition at the Kunsthalle Basel. And I think that was an eye-opening experience for many people as well. And I feel incredibly lucky to have had a sustained conversation over the years, a few small things here and there that had really meaningful manifestations for myself, as well as for different institutions that I worked for. So to me, it is a culmination to do this exhibition. Not to suggest that this is the end of it, because I hope that this is the sort of milestone for many other things to come. But I think we should start talking about the exhibition per se first. So there are a number of reasons why I at M+, we as a whole curatorial team wanted to bring two artists, Isamu Noguchi and Danh Vo, together. One of the reasons, and this is going to sound perhaps a little bit too institutional, but I think it is good to say, is that when you're building an institution with the collection and programming and also what you want to present to the public in the future, you think about the important voices and viewpoints, not only of the present, but also in the past. Internally, we use the term anchor, figures that are really anchoring our philosophy, our narratives, and two such artists are Isamu Noguchi and Danh Vo. There are many ways to explain why that is the case, but a really simple way of saying it is that for us, curatorially, Noguchi really represents the ideal of internationalism and cosmopolitanism of the 20th century. And at present, I think those ideals are more necessary than ever. And I think Jan, in his own way, in the first 2 decades of the 21st century, is also realizing that. So these two figures representing these ideals of two different times, I felt could be in conversation with each other. And I think many of you who are especially local would know that M+, even though the building is not yet ready to walk in for the public, that we have been doing many public programs, including exhibitions. Just at the M+ Pavilion over the last 2.5 years, we've made 8 exhibitions, including this one, exposing and sharing various aspects of the institution's identity and collection, such as ink art, design, architecture, and Hong Kong visual culture. And having done many of these projects, we felt that it is also important to just put artistic practices front and center, and really focus on the objects and art making. So these are the institutional reasons why we organize these exhibitions. But of course, it's always a conversation when you're working with an artist. So I will pose my first question to Jan, which is, why did you want to do this exhibition?
I don't remember the story like you do. I think it's it I'm speaking into. Okay. I think some few years ago I encountered very late these other aspects of Noguchi's work, which was from an exhibition in Mexico City, actually, where the museum only concentrated on the playscapes. And what triggered me was that he proposed to do these playscape for children to encounter and learn form from a very early age. And he proposed several empty lots in New York to make these playscapes. And none of them was realized. So instead, he would cast them in bronze. And I was thinking, that's a very beautiful idea, to use bronze as casting, in principle, your failures. And I wanted to understand more, also from his own words, that basically all his work came from this idea of playscapes. So digging into that universe has been or is one of the best experiences I've done. So when I was doing this, I think I talked with you, and you had in mind also Noguchi, and I think that was how it started. And what I mean, this is not the first time that I, install other artists' work. I actually really love it, because it's you can read about an artist or you can look at an work, but to install or to install works of other artists is a great privilege, and it's a great privilege to learn about the work too. I mean, Noguchi's work in public, I cannot carry them around, but to just sense the weight of a sculpture is just something you can read or look at, So it's when I do these kind of things, it's in principle a learning process, first of all. And then sometimes it turns out good, sometimes not. But in this case, I was kind of surprised.
Okay. So to go a little bit further there, then, so you just talked about what was that first realization of your interest, but can you say more about what is it about Noguchi that you found interesting? Because I don't think you've always found him interesting necessarily. You might have had even certain reactions to a preconception of what kind of an artist is, but you've really discovered many other aspects of who he is as a person and as an artist, no?
Yeah. So, like Noguchi produced works over 60 years. That's more than I have lived my life. So to dig into his universe, I think, it's a kind of impossible. But so far, at least, what really appeals to me is the playfulness, is the practicality. I see this research as a kind of reminder. I think the exhibition too, and this is, I guess, is also why it's called Noguchi for Danh Vo, to remind yourself of what it means to be an artist in a certain way. And that way that Noguchi works, which appeals to me, is that, it reminds me that, as an artist, I think you establish a certain way of thinking through experiences, through work, through relationships. And with that mindset, you can do whatever, And he didn't have any hierarchy between a stone sculpture or two sticks or a chair. And throughout all his production, you just see this consistent curiosity, playfulness, a particular mindset, which is good for me to be reminded of.
So, you were earlier saying that I was also thinking about Noguchi too, and just to be a bit confessional, I guess, the way that I previously understood Noguchi was coming from sort of my own interest of, him being a really an odd man out in many ways, and of course everybody knows that he's born to a Japanese father and American mother. He clearly had a Japanese name, and to be biracial and to have a Japanese name in early to mid 20th century America already poses quite an obstacle. And then there's, of course, the famous biographical episode of him voluntarily entering one of the internment camps for Japanese Americans that was set up in the later years of World War II in the wake of the Pearl Harbor bombing. So that really episode was more of an interest to me necessarily than necessarily the rest of the aspects, really. So what has been really revelatory for me is to think about his practice from the beginning to the end, and the practice that is not determined by the conditions of the birth, basically. But having said that, it is true that throughout his career, even as a recognized mature artist, that he did face prejudices, right? That a well-known New York critic reviewing his exhibition and calling it a little Japanese mistake, for instance, or using expressions such as it is Oriental and feminine, I mean, I think these are clearly dismissive words, so he was standing out against that milieu and the generation of artists that he's part of, which is basically abstract expressionist generations, very masculine, very macho. So I don't think, so I guess I'm saying all of this to suggest that in a sense, you could say that he didn't make it easy for himself. He could have stuck to a particular kind of formal language, particular kind of philosophy, and be consistent and unitary about it, because that's what was expected of artists of that generation. So I wonder how you feel about that.
I think this is what makes it so interesting to dig into. And it's really, what is it that he mentioned, that hybridity foresees the future. And what I think is, what interests me is really like how he fusioned like cultures, places, but also people. When you look at the Akari lamps, of course it's well known that he was the only apprentice of Brancusi, but his lifelong friend and mentor, the other one, he had more, but the other one is Buckminster Fuller, and to put a light bulb into this ancient tradition of paper lantern, and even in one of the Akari lamps, it's the endless column. Yeah. To fuse these two modernists, I mean, that's the opposition, and to be able to fusion those two characters in this beautiful work like the Akaris, I think, that's the best.
So earlier you were saying that he really considered everything, like all the works and objects that you see in this slideshow, and also in the exhibition, of course, he considered all of them as sculptures. Akari is a light sculpture. Stones, of course, are, but even the furniture pieces that he designed are sculptures for him and for you. Then what do you think is the definition of sculpture for him that can encompass all of them?
It's strange because when I look at Noguchi sculptures, there's a certain practicality in the work, but at the same time he can think in geological time, and that's not so practical. Like when you think of, when the simplicity of many of the sculptures, you don't really, actually only when you look closer, you really understand like how simple they're made, like how what do you call it? Like, yeah, they're just very simple, you know. Like the way that he sees the stones is basically the first thing you learn when you carve stone, just to do these dots, you know.
Yeah.
And from that, like there's one piece that's called Childhood in the exhibition. He creates like cosmos, you know. And
So that's perhaps the lesson from Buckminster Fuller.
probably, no.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's yeah.
I guess I'm asking the question because I'm also curious about your own definition of sculpture, because you often work with objects, often found objects and images, and while Noguchi had, as you were just saying, very simple and practical ways of producing forms, but nonetheless he was a sculptor. He was working with physical materials, whether they're stones or metal or whatnot. I guess those two are really primary materials. So one could argue that he's just still working within the bounds of the definition, of classical definition of being a sculptor. I mean, maybe this is, of course, very simplistic, but the way that you're working with objects are more found objects or ready-made. I mean, but is that good enough of a definition of Danh Vo's sculpture? Or
Yeah, like there's a profound difference. I never started with Brancusi, and I mean, actually, Noguchi, he knew how to carve stone, If I knew it too, I would love to do it, I think it's just because I don't know how to do it. But I think for sure that we share the same curiosity, because what he did was that, he would, like the sheet, and what are the metal, galvanized steel. When that came out, it was the company that gave samples to him to different designers and artists to test them out, I mean, in that way, he was even a pop artist. He was just like, whatever came along, he would just mold it, fold it, whatever. And it was, it's basically just origami, And he was so good in just crossing from one field to the other easily, And I think every time he saw some new materials, he was just all over it. And yeah.
So I was just looking at the earlier slide that shows outdoor view with a container with one of your sculptures, which is the ear part of your project, We the People Detail. And for those of you who are not so familiar with the project, a few years ago, Jan created the Statue of Liberty, or recreated, I should say, replicated to one-to-one scale in about 250, 260 pieces, fabricated in China, and with the intention of those pieces never coming together as a whole the way the Statue of Liberty has. So seeing that particular image, which is coming up soon, sitting next to the play sculpture by Noguchi, there is, in fact, despite what I was describing, that I guess affinities there in terms of the idea of using found object or ready-made.
Yeah. Yeah, so the play sculpture, the red one outside, it's made of 6 sewer pipe bins, and it's the largest bin before the shit gets docked. Noguchi just takes 6 of them and creates this beautiful thing, Yeah, it's just so good. No, yeah, but yeah, I don't, like it looks like a very structured exhibition, but it was very impulsive decisions, and we made the containers because when we looked through the checklist for Noguchi's work, suddenly we just had too many works, and I mean, I actually would be happy if there was less work of mine there. But there was a little push from Doryun that, no, we need to have some of your works. But since the main pavilion was full already, we added some more spaces. And I don't think I ever told you this, but one of my favorite designs of all time is the Billy shelf. Did I ever tell you that?
Yes.
Okay.
Like it's an IKEA Billy shelf.
IKEA Billy shelves, because that was created in order when IKEA, it was after, but that was one of the best designs when it was outsourced to be produced in China. Billy shelves was designed. You called IKEA like Scandinavian modernists or whatever, but it's actually designed so you have no single
Empty space in the container.
spaces in the container. And I always thought that was, pretty good design. So when I stumbled into Noguchi's work, he has, of course, this is what many years, many decades before IKEA, but he has the same principle, no? Like when you think of these folding sculptures like Strange Bird, all the akaris is made like to be collapsible and shipped, And in his case, of course, it derived from other ideas. So I thought it was interesting to try it out. But never again. It's terrible to exhibit in containers.
So then maybe we can actually drill a little bit into just to share with the audience here how an exhibition comes about. So one thing that I haven't mentioned yet is that the exhibition is co-curated and co-organized with a partner, which is the Noguchi Museum in New York. And so there was a partner who was a Dakin Hart, who's a senior curator there, and we really relied on his expertise in the work of Noguchi. We gave, I think our brief was to just give us the whole diversity of Noguchi's practice as practically possible, because of course it is quite a lot of logistics and cost to be able to bring that many number of works, almost 3 dozen works from the museum, and he really was able to secure works from the 1920s to the 1980s, and you can see in the images really a whole variety of works. But the way that we planned it is really without planning. Right, because we didn't have a floor plan. We did try, but then we gave up. We didn't plan where all the works were going to go. We knew that volumetrically they will more or less fit into the space in a very airy way. So it was really decided on the spot, which I think works with the way that you work in general. But it would be great if you can just share with the audience, what were you thinking as you were placing certain objects?
Yeah, believe it or not, I've never made a maquette before in my life. I tried, or somebody have imposed it on me, but I just never did it. And I think it's really because I believe that there's so many elements that you can't foresee, And I think actually it is a problem many times when I go and see exhibition, and when you have seen it made up in a SketchUp or maquette, because it's just a method for me to be in the space, having the physical object there, and understand the relationship between those things. One principal thing that I wanted to do for this exhibition was to break down these hierarchies, to put like a paper lamp with a bronze sculpture, a brass sculpture, and a stone sculpture, because there is no difference in principle. So I took that as a, place to departure, and then it looks like this.
So then, okay, I'm gonna just keep at it. So then there were certain, of course, specific decisions that you made. For instance, the round bases that you wanted to have, and then one of the combination of works that you see there are Strange Bird, the sculpture from 1940s that was cast in bronze in the early 1970s, sitting next to these 3 little pockmarked granite sculpture, and then there is an akari lamp hanging. I mean, that's a very particular kind of decision that you made to create the combination. So what was your thinking there?
No, there was to break. Yeah, the idea is maybe whatever. Like I'm still here to learn. So the round thing, we take one element at a time. I'm just like, I have done so many square and seen so many square pedestals, and you don't know why it should be like this. So, I mean, I was just thinking maybe round one would be good. One thing I was thinking of was that Noguchi, I mean, he was good in so many things, but he was not like the best colorist. I mean, they like, probably because he's a sculptor, and me too. I don't use so many colors either, but colors are nice. And I was thinking maybe we should add in some colors too. And this was a nice way of doing it. And sometimes it actually adds in. I'm just a little bit too tired of white walls and white pedestals and square things. So it's actually, I'm testing it out.
So, and then one of the decisions that we had to make rather close to the actual installation, it was a little bit nerve-wracking, is to include that pavilion form. And just to share with the audience, they originally, what would you call it, sort of almost like a diamond-shaped the square panel of akari lamps, which is called model PL2. Originally, we were going to build a room that is more like a cube. But then what happened is that there was actually a lot of regulations in Hong Kong where if you build a cube, and the people can potentially enter, then there has to be an exit sign, even if it is just the size of 3 meters by 3 meters, so we had to abandon that.
But there was also like fire alarm and whatever we had to, like
sprinkler. You have to put sprinklers on that. So we basically had to give up that idea. So we adapted this idea of the pavilion, which you were inspired by your trip to sort of mountainous region of China, and they started incorporating into your exhibitions. And so I guess the first question there is that why were you so interested in that particular form? Yeah. This form right
it's not like the form only, it's actually the structure, It's, we forget it, but if you strip down like all these kind of, Chinese ornaments, you have like a very modular system, which was refined during the Song Dynasty, like the dugong, like the Chinese joinery. And it's a modular system that, the Bauhaus looked very much into it too. And like I always really liked that structure. I mean, like the joineries. So when I travel in this region of the Dong, I mean, they do it many places, but in this region you could buy them, they still do it. So I bought 3 or something, so then I use it for different exhibitions. But this is also a testing out, Right. But it's I did it one time only before, which was in Denmark somewhere, and they're just really nice spaces within a space where they just function very well. I didn't knew, it's something you have to try out, but they're very functional. People really use them, and it just creates like this intimacy that protects you a little bit. Especially, this is not like with the pavilion, it's not that big, but especially this monstrous museum, like the one you're getting, it's just like 2 big spaces, Yeah. And you have to protect yourself in spaces, but also just, they're monstrous rooms. Monstrous spaces.
No, it is, I mean, definitely really loved because I think it's really lovely for visitors, even though it is a rather small gallery. The fact that they can sit down and also look out and look at other works, whether inside as well as outside, I think is, it adds a special touch to it. It's very much appreciated. So But then, you know, of course, what we had to do in that space is that unlike when you did it in Copenhagen, when you had 6 meter high ceiling, we have only 3.5 meter high ceiling. We actually had to squash the roof structure, but you didn't seem to be too bothered by that. So it's not about the form itself for you then.
No. Yeah, I was a little bit bothered actually. You know, I mean, it looked a bit weird to dwarf it, but you know, you cannot get it all, and sometimes you just need to go with the flow, and yeah.
All right, maybe enough about that exhibition then. You know, then I think we can talk about some of the previous exhibitions that you had done that people have been looking at. So it ranges in date from 2009 to 2018, I believe. So 2010, I think. The Artist Space exhibition was in 2010. So that was, I guess, this second or third exhibition following the Basel exhibition, where you did something totally different, but also I thought was quite beautiful and revelatory. Can you share with the audience what you wanted to do in the Artist Space exhibition? What did you do?
You didn't tell me about that question. Yeah, no, it's difficult, you know. I don't know, like all the exhibitions have been like a journey in itself. And it is really true when I say that everything, you know, like I wasn't what do you call it? Breastfeeded with culture, you know. So I learned it very late. And even in school, I didn't thought I would become an artist, you know. And then I did one exhibition, and it took the next exhibition, and I learned from them, not only from exhibition making, but also art in general. You know, people, you know, I think that's how, you know, like that was what happened basically. So, so each spaces, each situation, each country demands certain things, and that is a part of my learning process. And you know, like I'm not that young, but I hopefully still have 20, 30 years to work, you know. So I better keep something for the future.
Do you want to open it up to the audience? Okay. I think we can spend a lot of time asking more questions, not just from me, but from the audience. So if anybody has questions for Jan, please raise your hand. Don't be shy. There's a question of it. Just wait for the microphone.
Hello, Dan. I'm Chris Moore from Randian magazine. I'd like to hear about the genesis of the series of letters, the saints' letters, that your father writes, copies in his calligraphy. I'd like to hear about how that concept developed, if you could give us a couple of minutes on that.
If you have a couple of hours.
I'm fine with that.
Joking.
I'm totally fine with that. I'm not sure about everyone else, but I'm not going anywhere.
So maybe you explain the piece a little bit, and then I can tell about the background.
Okay, so but that is a curator's job. So the text of the letter is based on a farewell letter that was written by a French Jesuit missionary who was sent to northern Vietnam when it was known as Tonkin, and this is 1860s. And so the missionary's name is Jean-Théophane Venard, and it's a beautiful, very florid language of the 19th century, which includes passages such as, you know, all of us are God's children, and we're flowers in God's garden. And then God decides when to pluck that flower. And then I'm going earlier than normally expected. And, you know, it's like a beautiful letter, a beautiful text. And so Jan found it some time ago and decided that this letter would be written by his father, who has a beautiful penmanship, but as essentially open edition or endless edition. Whoever wants a copy of this letter can send a check with a certain amount of money, and then Jan's father will write it and send it back to you. So again, endless in a sense that it will continue to go on as long as Jan's father is alive or is capable of doing it. And I guess another aspect of important aspect of that particular work is that he doesn't understand French, so it is a mechanical process. Does he understand now what it means? Yeah. Okay, now he does. Okay, but he didn't necessarily understand the content of it before.
So he's written like 1,600 letters, I think. We have 36 minutes. I hope I can manage this. So there's a lot of things in it. First of all, I think if I contributed to anything in the arts that was with this body of work, or this work, or whatever it is, I still can't define it. But I was traveling in Vietnam. Very late in life, I started to travel back to Vietnam. And I stumped into this church who had like a skull on display. And there was a little text about it, that it was the Saint Théophane Bernard. The head was there, but the body was in Paris. At that time, I think the year after, I was fortunate to be invited for residency at Cadiz in Paris. So one of the first things I did was like, where is this body? You know, I want like to. That's weird. Why would the body? And you know, where is this body? And I stumped into the seminar that trains all the missionaries since the 17th century, but they were of course mostly active in 19th century. And I stumped into this most beautiful museum. They have like, you know, every time a missionary got killed, they would drag relics and, you know, the knives, the whatever. And anybody that goes to Paris are interested in missionaries who go to that place. Anyhow, that was one thing. And it was actually when I was in Paris that I was looking around, and there was this book with a lot of letters from Théophane Bernard. And then, of course, another thing is that I knew my father's handwriting, because when he had his shitty food stalls when I was a child, you know, he hated to do the burgers and fries and whatever, so that was my mother. But he loved like to, you know, write these signs, you know, a burger and fries for 25 kroners or whatever. And that was what he was using his time for. That's one thing. It's very fragmentized, but I think towards the end it describes very well like my working process. You know, like one thing I'm always concerned about is that what is it in society that defines quality and not? That's of course a totally made up thing. And with my background, I learned from very early on that you have to define these things yourself. You have to make your own space. My father, when he had all these shops, I shouldn't tell this publicly, but I have done it before. He learned, you know, when he did like the tax fraud thing for his businesses, he would, because the businesses were always really bad. So he would, you know, every night he would take the daily receipts and he would, you know, rewrite them. But you can do that when you don't earn so much money. So imagine he've done that for 30 years or something. He retired, and my little sister, she had like a shop, but she earned 20 times more than he ever did when he had shops, you know. And he one time asked my sister if she needed some help, you know. And she was, yeah, why not? And he was doing this, you know, but imagine how many hours that would take. So it created this system that he had to get up like at 6 o'clock in the morning and like just sitting there for 8 hours and doing this. And the worst problem was that he collected all the original ones, and he wanted my sister and brother who had like country house to take them and burn them, you know, to burn the traces. And I came back one day and there was this family drama. And my brother complained because he was like, I'm not going to participate in this bullshit, you know? And I told him, you know, like, I think actually it's really beautiful because it's not about the money. I think it's about this beautiful thing that he, for 30 years, did something, you know? And that was what he was good at. That was what he had done every day for fucking 30 years, you know? And sitting there sitting there retired, doing nothing in this boring country of Denmark, you know? And just to activate yourself. And, you know, this is what we forget, us privilege, you know? That for people, they just want to do something they feel comfortable with because they know what it is, you know? I think these kind of elements constituted this work because it didn't matter what my father was doing. So I told him when I saw the letter, it all fall in place, you know? I never had a really good relationship with my father, but to activate him and just making him doing this labor, you know? It doesn't matter if it's calligraphy or sitting and putting in these numbers. I think that's reality. And that's why I think that this piece is the contribution that I've done to in the arts. Now I forgot what I wanted to say. It was a little bit all over. But the pieces are kind of all over. So I can tell a funny story. It was like, because I pay him this 100, I gave him 100 euros for it, for each letter, of course, and this is a lot of money for him. So, of course, he didn't ask questions. And, there's this term, conspiracy of silence. That's what my family do, and me. So, with a lot of things. So he never asked, really. He was just happy that I sent him this money once a while. And he have this terrible chat site with expat, like the worst expat Vietnamese that, sitting there and complaining about how the communists took over. And they live everywhere. So he found somebody that could speak French. So a year later, he would have it translated, I think. And he came back to me. I went to church every Sunday until I was 18 years old. And he came back to me and he was like, Yang, why didn't you ever tell me that I was writing this important letter of a saint? He's a saint. He's a real saint. What do you call it? Yeah. So he came there, and I was like, that's not part of the project. So that's what makes the work so beautiful, because it's out of my hands even. So he started to send it, like when I have an army of nieces and nephews. So when they have birthdays, he would send them one. And churches around the world he likes, like the Vatican and some old churches in Vietnam, he would send it to them, So it totally got its own life, and that's what makes it beautiful, And it has like all these contradictions, because I really, my preferable framing is really the clip frames, the standardization, because I see this work as totally a standardization, It's really like making calligraphy into pure labor. So it has all these kind of perversity in it, which attracts me a lot. No, I thought I had much more to say about that work, but I think that was all.
That's good. That was only 12 minutes, so I think we can go on to
very fast.
Yeah, but we can go on to the next question. Anybody else? No? Yeah? Nope. Okay, here's question first.
Hi, it's working. I'm from another magazine, and I'm writing something about, I already talked to Doryun, but about the lasting impact of Noguchi, especially going into maybe this internet age. He could have been a person on the internet who maybe would be all over it because he was a designer, he was in, designed public spaces, he was an artist, he was an industrial person involved with technology. I'm wondering, do you think is he properly appreciated in Asia because of his multiracial identity, and also what impact or what inspiration do you think he could have in the future?
Doryun?
He's already spoken to me about this, so it's
Yeah.
for you. Yeah.
Okay, I think for me, it's exactly what he did, not to talk about the East or the West. I think he ran from home, Every home he had, he would run from it. I think, of course, when you look into his production, he changes all the time until the late, in his, late period, where he really was much more focused and established like the museums and looking ahead, no? But what I think everybody should be interested in is like how we of course have to live in the moment, but we have to see ourselves in geological time. And that's, I would recommend everybody to do that, And then it's beyond like the near future or the internet or the cosmopolitan or whatever. I think he planted trees like this, and which he knew he never would see. And thinking in geological time, it keeps us a little bit more modest.
Hi, I do not write for a magazine. And so my question is really about your relationship to objects. I think we've discussed in the beginning clearly about sculpture and materiality and how it is, there are primordial matters that come into play when one sculpts. And then often I hear or read the found object or the ready-made associated with your work. And I'd like to disagree because I don't feel like formally that's interesting to you at all. And please correct me again. But there is really, I feel like an emotional seeking in the object where there is really a sought object rather than a found object. And I think it's a really wonderful, poetic, and emotional difference in your work. And so I don't know if that's a question. And also maybe part of that concern when I look at your work may also be about, philosophical beyond your personal experience with it. Because how is it that I feel what you feel, even though I do not have your experience or your reasoning for choosing an object over another?
No, that's a very good question, and I actually, so it's, like, when I look at art, or what attracts me looking at art, is that sometimes it bends my mind, I've seen this table so many times, and I see it 10 years later, and it grows with me. And, we should know by now that everybody looks at things differently. There's no, there's not a uniform viewer. We look at things with the luggage we all carry it. And that is very different from me to you, And I don't know how to negotiate these kind of things. I don't know even why my work is so much out there, Because when I started to work, what I found so beautiful, when I did like Oma Totem, like this washing machine and things from my grandmother, my poor grandmother, I was interested in this idea that somebody, that we, or people that would go into the exhibition would look at these kind of things that they recognize so well, but it's just really estranged, Because I think that's reality. The estrangement between you and me, an audience and the artist. And I wanted actually to represent that in the exhibitions. That was why I never had like any information or whatever, because I thought that was reality. And that was the estrangement that we have to confront ourselves in order to move forward in any direction. The estrangement between us humans, It was my biggest question still today, actually. How is it that we can have this massive amount of people functioning in these cities, totally detached from each other, but it functions. That is so fucking scary, you know?
Hi. So my question is about also the objects that you choose and kind of the stories behind them. It's funny that you just mentioned how you used to present them without any text or anything like that, and it created a kind of dichotomy of estrangement. I was wondering if you really care about the authenticity of things or like reality. Like it seemed like you're interested when your father kind of went rogue with the letters and everything like that and started writing them to other people, and like a lot of the objects that you use are very loaded, like historical objects. And like when I saw your show, Take My Breath Away at the Guggenheim, I questioned whether these things were actually what they said they were, or if it even mattered in the first place. Like, is it just the story or that like poetic beauty that you enjoy that's more important than that?
Do you want to answer that? You know, somebody told me born in 75 and have the birthdays of 5th of August is in Chinese a very good numbers. And I always said that I was born under a lucky star. Weird things came to me, you know. And so I mean, some objects are more important historical than other projects, but I think the combination of them makes it interesting, you know. I mean, like, who cares about my grandmother's fridge, you know? And on the other hand, you know, to get the chance to buy McNamara things from Robert McNamara, you know. So it, I don't know how it happened, but it did, you know. And I can only say that I'm born on the lucky star. And you know, of course, I'm also professional. So you know, what I had to do was to sharpen my eyes and look at things near you and far from you, and you know, it's a little bit skill too. But yeah. I don't think I answered your question.
Any other questions from the floor? Nope. Anything else that you want to discuss further? Oh, there's a question over here.
I want to know more about the orchids in the exhibition, the the plants, why they are there, and I know that the museum have to spray them and water them every day, and it might cause harm to the object. And how do you know that? How do you negotiate that with the museum, Noguchi Museum?
Yeah.
And
no.
then.
Oh, sorry.
And if I may have the second question is there a kind of switch between being a curator, a collector, and an artist when you placing object or playing with the certain space? How do you switch between these roles? Thank you.
Okay, so the first question is that Noguchi, when he did all his exhibition, if he had a vase inside of that exhibition, of course there should be flowers in it. And of course, we were not allowed to pour water in that vase, so we had to find other solution. And so that was why the orchid came about. And when we had and somebody took me to this beautiful, there's another place one should go if you haven't been there, the flower market in Hong Kong. And when I came there, I was like, we have to buy more, you know. And then, you know, a lot of flowers came about. And it's Noguchi Museum that was like, bring those flowers. They are fantastic. I mean, they really try to keep the spirit of Noguchi as he was alive, which is what all museums should do.
So I want to emphasize that we have very proper registrars and conservators at M+. And of course, their job, first of all, is to ensure the proper handling and the conservation of the objects, especially not only the objects that are all that belong to us in our collection, but also on loan as well. And it is a very typical sort of different personalities that one finds in the museum. Curators always want things to be shown without stanchions, and then so that people can get close to it without touching. And then, of course, registrars and conservators want to always put up barriers, and then not because they don't care about the public access to it, but because really their remit is to take care of the objects. So I think what was also interesting is that it wasn't just no. It is understanding, because if they don't understand, if they don't have the information about how Noguchi, as an artist, would have thought about these objects, he wanted them to be used. And then Noguchi Museum, with the mission of preserving the legacy as well as the spirit of the artist, are willing to let certain things happen that you normally wouldn't do in the museums, then we would have to listen to that. But certain conservation concerns are real when you have, I think this is what you're asking about, when you have organic matters inside a museum. Of course, it can attract insects and vermin and whatnot. So you just have to, and of course, humidity is always an issue. So if you want this much detail, we do take them out to soak them in water, and then we let all the water to drip first, so the moisture is contained, and then we bring them into the gallery so that it doesn't, potentially drip onto sculpture or to the akare lamps and whatnot. So, it was actually very intense but productive conversation and negotiation that we had to do as a hosting institution that has the responsibility of taking good care of the objects, but also hearing from the lender and what they're willing to do. And if they're willing to do that, then we have to make that happen as well. So, we all came from different points, but I think we found a place that's satisfactory for everybody. That's why the orchids are still hanging there.
So the other question was, a friend of mine told me, you don't get out of the closet in order to be put in a box. And I really believe that, I think, we all we have roles assigned to us, which is not our agenda. I think one has to break free from them and find our own agendas. And I just don't understand these categorization, For me, it's a learning process. And to learn, that's what we have to do in life. And that's why I wear all these kind of dresses.
Great. I think we have time for one more question, if anybody has any. You have another one? Okay, she has another one.
I'm sorry, but I'm curious of another thing in the exhibition. That is inside the container. There's the way that you do with the lighting. Is that certain kind of choice with the lighting in there, and then the fire thing. I don't know what to call it.
Fire hydrant
right,
or
right.
Extinguishers?
Yes. Is it like by law in Hong Kong that you have to have it there, or it's there because...
Hong Kong laws.
Oh, yeah? Okay. I got it. Thanks.
We don't talk about them. Oh, no, it's just, it was a kind of crazy. Exit signs, like... Hell. Hong Kong laws.
Yeah, we're very law-abiding, actually. Yes. Yeah. That's not our decision.
But it was really, I can sleep in the night, because the most terrible thing was actually the installation team, what they had to do and go through, maybe I do a container show other places, but never again in Hong Kong. And I would not recommend anybody to do that.
So just to explain a little bit there, Hong Kong does have very stringent regulations. One might say overzealous regulations. Of course, it comes from starts from a good place. Of course, it's a safety first and all of that. But I think the part of the work that we are doing at this new museum is to also talk to other stakeholders, including governmental departments, to make them understand that there are different considerations and concerns that one has to take into account in space of art and culture. So, it's a really a learning process. Well, speaking of learning process, I think it is a learning process for all our friends in the Fire Services Department and the Health and Safety and Regulations Department. And I don't really mean it as a joke either, that we have been making exhibitions over the last 5 years, over in that space for 2.5 years. In each exhibition, if you have seen more than this one, then sometimes we build a lot of temporary walls and whatnot, and that poses an even more challenge. So it's an education process for people whose job is to follow and enforce regulations, to be exposed more to these different situations. And we certainly are very hard at educating them, because once we go inside the actual museum building, it's literally 50 times as much as the exhibition space. So, I will admit that this has been a very challenging aspect of what we do, but one has to stay optimistic and positive about these things as well. Great. On that note about regulations, unless if there's any final question, no? Okay, then I think we're good. So thank you everybody for your attention, and thank you, Yang.